Hi, welcome to spring. This week has been pretty crazy. We have some politicians kind of changing their tune around the lockdowns. We've got Powell and Yellen testifying again. And of course, that means some craziness in the markets. My name is Brandon Steele. I'm a financial advisor with Mainsail Financial Group just here in Bellevue. And hopefully this is helpful. We just come to you every week, kind of share with you some updates of what's going on and kind of weed out all the noise of the media frenzy. I'm actually back in the office. For those who follow us that can tell, I got back, came back in this Monday, and it's very, very nice to be in. Got my test to be safe and came back negative, so I survived Florida. Happy to be back and ready to kind of dig back in now that I'm here in the office again. So let's jump right into things. This week we had quite a bit going on. So Tuesday this week was kind of the first data point to mention. We had new home sales come out. And last week, we talked a little bit about a little disappointing home sales number. This week, same deal. We actually had new home sales at about 775,000, which was about 100,000 less than expected. I don't know that this is anything to write home about, but it is kind of interesting just because these are kind of the first signs of any cracks in the housing market that we've really seen. And then also this week, we had a lot going on in terms of politicians and the Fed and all this. So just yesterday, Angela Merkel from Germany basically kind of went back on her discussions and her plans for a lockdown through Easter. She said basically that an Easter lockdown plan would be bad for the economy and kind of completely reverse that whole strategy. So I think this is really interesting. We are seeing numbers pick back up in COVID cases again, as things open back up. But it was really interesting, especially from her, who has been very conservative on this front, to kind of ease that. And so I don't know what that means necessarily. It's only one country over in that area, but others are kind of getting a little more strict, and she's pulling back, it seems like, a little bit. Maybe that's a sign of what's to come. I know here in the States, what has happened is as states open up, others feel a bit of pressure. And so they feel the need to open up a little bit as well. Same happened on the other end too, right? As states were closing, other states felt that pressure and felt they needed to close as well. But either way, I don't necessarily know if that carries over to the EU, but it will be interesting to see if so. On top of that, we also had Jerome Powell and Janet Yellen testifying yesterday. And there was a lot to kind of dissect or to kind of pull out of that. I'm not going to get into everything necessarily, but I think one of the biggest takeaways I got was that we heard them talk a lot about market valuations feeling a little bit high. You hear that all over the media as well. But basically the gist of it was that they both said they aren't too worried about it. They said market valuations are high, but with what's going on, they aren't too worried about those values. And I think probably a lot of that is because of all the spending going on and all the, low interest rates and all this kind of stuff that's propping up the markets a little bit. So it was just interesting to hear it from them, specifically on this. It's something we've talked about time and time again, but, definitely something to kind of keep an eye on. And all of this meant Wednesday was a crazy day in the markets, as you might imagine. Of this week, that was probably the biggest down day that we saw. And especially with the tech-heavy NASDAQ, we saw that really kind of pull back quite a bit. Another thing that came out of that was Fed Chair Powell talked a little bit about tapering, like how he's going to unwind all these programs he's put in place. Now, he didn't say he's going to, he didn't say how, but he did say that when the time comes, he will communicate well in advance of actually tapering and make sure that it's very well known if and when it is coming. I don't think this is too much different than what we've heard, through the past. So it's just important to pay attention to the Fed, I guess, is the takeaway here, and watch as they maybe share a little bit more or read between the lines a little bit too, because they may start to communicate that well in advance without actually communicating that well in advance, if that makes sense. So pay attention to that, because that will be really important for those who remember looking at the markets. I think it was 2016. We had the taper tantrum. Basically, as the Fed pulled back, the markets went crazy. And that's kind of the concern now, is how the Fed's going to pull back out of all these programs they've put in place without the markets getting spooked. So that'll be important to watch. Today, we had initial jobless claims come out. We had 684,000 jobs lost versus expectations of about 735,000. So very good news on that front. It's good to see that these numbers are coming down, and the last 3 weeks or so I think have been 700 and less. So it's good to see that. And then the markets, again, crazy day. It was down as low as 1%, I think, and then ended up closing up as high as 1%. So this day-to-day, like the intraday movement that we're seeing in the markets has just been crazy for about the past month or so. And again, if you look at it over that month, you wouldn't think a whole lot of it. It's kind of like marched up slowly, depending on which market you're looking at. But the intraday is just huge swings. So that's really important to watch. Fast forward, looking into next week, we have personal income, spending, and core inflation all coming out tomorrow, Friday. So we'll talk about that next week. And then next week on Thursday and Friday, we have big jobs numbers coming out again. This is where we have the ADP employment and the unemployment rate, all that good stuff, non-farm payrolls. So that will be all the jobs data for the month of March coming out next week. So pay attention next week. That'll be a good one to catch. And hopefully we get some good jobs numbers, which hopefully will kind of keep us moving here. So we'll jump right into the question of the week. Before I do that, as some of you may see over my right shoulder here, the book copies are in. I am so excited. So some of you may already know this, but April 1st for Financial Awareness Month, we are launching my new book. It's really for pre-retirees and retirees and how to really take control of their retirement planning. And all month for Financial Awareness Month, we're giving away free copies. So if you want a copy, just reach out. You can reach out to us directly, through whichever platform you're watching this, or email us info@mainsailfg.com. And for this week's question of the week, I want to talk a little bit about the Roth and something called the 5-year rule. We were recently featured in U.S. News for this particular topic. And so I thought it'd be good to kind of touch on it. And if you want the article, we can share that as well. But it's important to understand this. I think the Roth is becoming more and more valuable. Like more people are understanding the importance of a Roth to minimize required distributions, to create some tax-free income, to diversify their taxes, all these different kind of scenarios that the Roth can provide to you. However, there are some kind of nuances to be aware of. So there's something called the 5-year rule when it comes to a Roth. And I think this is really important to understand. There are really two types of distributions when we talk about Roths. There's qualified and non-qualified. And really what that means is if you have a qualified distribution, all that money that you take out is fully tax-free. Obviously, that's the name of the game. That's why we establish a Roth, right? So the key here is that there's a 5-year rule associated with that. Generally speaking, your contributions are qualified. So no matter when you take them out, you can always take your money back out of a Roth tax-free. However, there's a 5-year rule when it's tied to your earnings. So in other words, if you started a Roth today in 2021, you've got to wait 5 years before you can actually pull out that interest, that earnings component of your Roth account, and still be tax and penalty free. So I think that's really important, especially for people who are converting or close to retirement and contributing to Roth. It's really important to understand that, because you may convert today and not realize that you actually can't really access those dollars for another 5 years or so to get the full tax benefit anyway. Now that said, converting money from a pre-tax account to a Roth account and then taking it right back out is kind of like planting an apple tree and kind of pulling the fruits off before they're ready. I mean, the whole benefit of a Roth is giving it time to grow and get that tax benefit, that tax freedom out of it. So the longer that gets pushed off, the more valuable a Roth account is. But nonetheless, things come up, things change. And so it's important to understand that, just to make sure if something shifts, you're ready to handle that as well. So I think that's where we'll wrap up here for this week. If you have any question of the week for us, please do submit them. Feel free to email us and we'd be happy to answer those in the weeks to come. Thanks as always for joining us. We will see you next Thursday, same place, same time, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you and have a good week.